I, unfortunately, am an adult. Well, at least legally. I don't feel much or act like an adult, but regardless, I experience the world through the eyes of someone who has been on this big floating hellhole for currently, at the time of writing the script, 22 years. While that may not be old to some, I have grown up through and experienced a lot of technological development. I grew up in an era with flip phones, with Java installed, an early but blossoming internet, and lastly, and most importantly to this video, a PlayStation 2. While not directly related to the topic at hand, I mention it to emphasize that I grew up in a time where gaming was different. When I was growing up, I remember how real all the games I played felt, how real the graphics looked, how I believed that this was the end all be all of video game technology. Unfortunately, revisiting a lot of older titles that I played as a child have left me wondering just how I put up with some of the technical difficulties of the time, from abhorrent early 2000s CGI to jarring loading screens in the middle of what otherwise would be open world exploration. Despite all of this, I still consider the PS2 era of gaming to be among the best. I feel that something that modern gaming is lacking is soul. While soul is a pretty abstract concept, it is certainly something that I've heard often described as sort of a vibe that a lot of video games in the early 2000s had, which I always saw as kind of a myth created to rationalize our nostalgia for the era until I played Persona 4 Golden. Up front, until within the last couple of years, I hadn't really played many RPGs. I had no nostalgia for the Persona series. So, this was kind of my first dive into it. But first, a little background context. I had kind of had a faint notion of the Persona series. I had no idea what it was about, but somehow the idea that it was one, a JRPG, and two, a pretty important and beloved one, had been burned into my mind. I ignored Persona 5 somehow on release until Persona 4 Golden got a port to PC in 2020. Upon release, I still ignored it for about another year, until a whim randomly hit me to play it, so I bought it on Steam, booted it up, and fell in love. But I'd argue that it had less to do with what the game was and more to do with how the game made me feel. The game was insanely PS2, which won't make much sense to anyone that didn't have a PS2, but to the people it does, it likely brings some flashes of rough edges and that weird fog effect that every game had for some reason. You know the one I'm talking about. To save a lot of time describing Persona 4 to you, I'll just sum up how it made me feel. It made me feel like a kid again. I dedicated a week to playing through the entire game, and once I did, I felt empty. I longed to feel that way again. And I just assumed at the time that it was the series that made me feel that way. So I picked up Persona 3 and then Persona 5, and I never got that feeling from those two. So I moved on to Megami Tensei as a whole because I thought maybe it was just the aesthetic and the demon design. So I played SMT3 Nocturne, which did give me a similar feeling. So I chased it further. I played most of the SMT series, and nothing ever really made me feel that way that Persona 4 and Nocturne had made me feel. To this day, I've been chasing that high. Now, I know you probably didn't click on a Persona 4 video, but I promise that it's related. Eventually, I realized that feeling was not the games themselves, but the era that they came out in. The early 2000s were a time of advancement on the technology front. Within just a few years, we went from 2D being the standard to fully 3D open worlds, and with that came a lot of experimentation. I believe that soul that a lot of people describe relating to the PS2 era is a result of this experimentation. companies were still trying to figure out how to navigate these advancements. And with all these new tools at their disposal, they had to be willing to try something new. Another thing I believe has killed this experimentation is the mass appeal that video games have received going into the 2010s. And before you hop in the comments and tell me that I'm a hipster who only likes things that are super niche, I'd like to state that I don't believe that the mass market appeal itself is what killed the creativity in gaming. It was money. When a market, like early 2000s gaming, is niche, it can try new things, because ultimately someone out there will like what you made. However, when a market has mass appeal, companies boil down what worked in the past to its most generic, inoffensive, and thoughtless form, and infinitely replicate it. You can see this with what people refer to as the AAA Sony game. Overly cinematic, linear, dialogue driven, and often boring. Now, that's not to say that I hate these games, but it's clear to see a formula present. Another example would be the Ubisoft esque open world, RPG ish action games that are everywhere nowadays. The gaming market has become profitable, so companies dumb down their games to appeal to a wider audience. I'd like to restate, once again, that I do not blame the audience for gaming. Gaming should be for everyone. But formulaic, simple games are meant to appeal to the widest audience possible, and they're easy to replicate. And they often make a lot of money. Game development has become insanely expensive since the PS2 era, and that leads to companies taking fewer risks in order to maximize profit. All this context and critique of the gaming industry may feel a little detached from my previous topic, but I promise it ties in. I believe this loss of soul directly ties in with the death of AA gaming. As games got more expensive to make, these little companies either sold themselves off to companies like Activision or EA and were more than likely canned after just a few years, or shut themselves down due to bankruptcy. A lot of these AA companies, Pandemic Studio comes to mind, were massively passionate small teams of developers, and not the mega corporations we think of today. These people wanted to make a game first and a profit second, and it shows in their work. Sadly, Pandemic Studios, the company I mentioned earlier, met the same fate as a lot of these AA studios. They were bought by EA and swiftly dissolved. All that being said, I don't think that creativity in gaming has completely died. Some of the best games that I've played recently have been indie games. Indie is the new AA, which is kind of bittersweet. It's great on one hand that small developers are able to make creative, thought provoking games that are still fun to play. But on the other hand, it's sad that even through the success of indie games, they still do not have the recognition and industry backing that they deserve. I feel like the best way that I can end this video is to name off some games that I've played recently that I feel have that soul that I so desperately seek, so that hopefully you can experience something unique. Some of these I may make videos on in the future, so I won't go into much detail. First of these games is No More Heroes. It's a pretty trippy series that I thought was kind of hard to get into, but with the more recent PC ports, although I have heard some are buggy, are probably the most successful that they've been in a long time. The second being SMT Nocturne. I think the SMT series has probably the most variety of any series that I have played in forever. Every single game has something new to offer, but if you're thinking about getting into it, start with Nocturne. It's a great jumping off point, it gets you used to the series mechanics, especially mainline, and it, in my opinion, is one of the best gaming experiences that I've had ever. If you're looking for something a little more survival based, I would highly recommend Project Zomboid. I've been playing this game a little bit over on my Twitch channel, which I will link in the description if you would like to come watch me. I think it is probably the most engrossing survival game that I've played that was not multiplayer focused. It is one of the most lonely experiences playing solo, and it constantly puts you on edge. This game, I think, is almost infinitely replayable. So for the next one, I'm just going to tell you the name of it, and if you want to do research into it, feel free. I would highly recommend going into this game completely blind. That game would be Deadly Premonition. It, as a concept, has really changed a lot of my identity, especially online. My profile pic on YouTube and almost every platform is the main character from this game. I don't think it's a necessarily a fun game to play, but it is definitely one of the most interesting games that you could play. So far, I haven't really recommended very many indie games in this list, and the next two are going to be focused mainly around indie games. We've got Enter the Gungeon, which is one of my favorite bullet hells, and I don't even like bullet hells. If you like roguelikes and you love items with crazy synergies with one another and a lot of shit constantly going on, Enter the Gungeon is probably the most replayable one, I would say, other than Isaac, that I could imagine. And I'm not really an Isaac fan. If you are interested by Enter the Gungeon, please, please, please give it a try. And then for this one, yet again, I'm gonna just tell you the name. If you feel like you want to do research into it, feel free. I would highly, highly, highly recommend going into this game knowing nothing about it. And that game would be Cruelty Squad, a one of the most bizarre things I have ever played, and I recommend it 10 out of 10. The next one you most definitely have heard of, and that is The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Um, this is probably one that I couldn't recommend to everybody. If you can stomach a lot of those early 2000s, and I mean like early 2000s game mechanics that aren't exactly understanding of the player, uh, I would greatly recommend Morrowind. Honestly, I did a vanilla playthrough not too long ago, and it to this day is still a game that I go back to just to fuck around. In the same way that I do Skyrim. So if that seems like something you would be interested in, 100% try Morrowind. And lastly, this is most definitely a game that I will probably make a video about in the future, and that is Yakuza 0. I personally was always kind of turned off by Yakuza, mainly because of it just seemed too absurd for me. I didn't think there would be any seriousness to the game at all, and I was dead wrong. The plot, especially in Yakuza 0, is pretty engrossing constantly. There was never really a moment where I felt the story was not progressing in an interesting way. And I'm normally the kind of person that skips through dialogue. I don't think I skipped more than one or two cutscenes in the entire game. It was fun the entire time. The combat probably is something that would be harder to recommend to people. It is a little simplistic, but if that seems like something you would like, highly recommend Yakuza 0. Well, here is my first real YouTube outro. I have not uploaded on this YouTube channel seriously since I was probably a sophomore in high school. I am now a 22-year-old adult. The focus that I had back then was a lot more like gaming content that was popular around that area. I would like to try to move more into like a video essayist kind of like personal experience. I don't want to try to beat people over the head with information. I don't pretend to be super informed on these topics. Um, I just talk about how things make me feel, and that's what I want to continue to do in the future with this channel. If that's something that it sounds like you would enjoy, please like and subscribe. I will hopefully continue to make videos on this channel. Um, I would also like to state I know that the editing in this video is more than likely atrocious, sorry, and the audio is probably all over the place. I have little to no experience with video editing. So this is all new to me. I am learning the software as I use it. So hopefully within a few videos I'll be more up to standard. But this is just something that I kind of had an idea for that I wanted to put out there, and I hope that people like it. If you do like it, like I said, please like and subscribe. There hopefully will be more content.